Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I am joined with Mike Schopp and Eric Balkman, and we are going to be looking at some Week 18 matchups. Week 18 is weird when a lot of teams start resting players and coaches make some decisions that we didn't expect coming. I was inspired by an awesome article written by Jeff Bell that you can find on the Footballguys website that talks about some of this Week 18 motivation, everything from contract incentives to playoff seeding and draft picks. So we are going to talk about every Week 18 matchup in today's episode of The Launchpad, but we are also going to talk about the FFPC Footballguys Playoff Challenge, where for $35, you can enter a tournament with a chance to win $100,000. You can find that at FFPC. You can find a link for that contest in the description below. Be sure to check that out, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. What players are you targeting in the Footballguys Playoff Challenge on FFPC? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. And Eric, why don't you go ahead and start us off here? Who are some guys that you think should be targeted in this playoff challenge?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think that we need to understand here is you are going up against thousands of players trying to win $100,000. And anytime that's the case, you need to understand that you don't want to go full chalk, obviously. But I think like going with players that are going to be widely owned, there's nothing wrong with that. And then just maybe being a little bit different on a couple of them. So you think about teams that are already in the playoff challenge. You know, with the Bengals, there's going to be Burrow, there's going to be Mixon, there's going to be Higgins, there's going to be Chase, right? So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of, like, you got to pick the right one, obviously. And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is you got to hit the Super Bowl correctly because you'll get double points for whatever player is playing in that championship game for you, or hopefully two players, you know, with the AFC and the NFC. I think if you look at the Bills, there's going to be a lot of people that will go with Josh Allen, that will go with Stephon Diggs. There's a pivot there, I think. We saw what Gabe Davis did last year, 8 catches, 200 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That was massive. I think you can also make a case for being different with Buffalo, especially as the weather gets colder, with being different with Devin Singletary, or perhaps even James Cook, if you really want to get funky with it. I think that those would be interesting pivots there. In the NFC,
even Dawson Knox, 3 straight games with a touchdown.
Okay,
he's heating up as we're getting to the playoffs now.
Yes, and it's tight end premium, so I'm not going to poo-poo that. But I'll tell you this too: if you want to win the whole thing, and you believe in Dawson Knox, then Knox is the type of guy that could carry you, you know, if he just goes ham and turns into Travis Kelce for 3 or 4 weeks, could be awesome. In the NFC, I think it's interesting, too, because everybody's very excited about the Eagles and Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders. Remember, it just seemed like yesterday Miles Sanders was saying, don't draft me in fantasy football. And now here we are. He could be the starting running back on the #1 seed in the NFC, which is crazy to think about. Obviously, A.J. Brown there. I don't know how many, pivots you're going to get out that. I think with the Cowboys is interesting because there's going to be a lot of CeeDee Lamb. There's going to be a lot of Dalton Schultz, and there's going to be a lot of Tony Pollard. What about Ezekiel Elliott, guys? You think about Ezekiel Elliott, a guy who's been getting a lot of volume here down the stretch, and I know Pollard's been missing time. But everybody, like in high stakes fantasy football teams, like everybody has hated Ezekiel Elliott since like 2019 or maybe 2020. And now he's the type of guy that, yeah, maybe he doesn't, get 170, 180 yards rushing in any one game. But what if Dallas makes a run? What if he's getting 100, 110 yards and 2 touchdowns in the opening game? What if he goes for 120 and 2 touchdowns the next game? All of a sudden, Ezekiel Elliott's looking like a really interesting guy for the playoffs. And then you think about the teams that are sort of battling for that final spot that could go on a run. You think about my Green Bay Packers, too. Nobody wants to play them right now. And if they beat Detroit, they're in there. Then you're opening up Christian Watson, Aaron Jones, perhaps the Packers defense, the way they've been turning the ball over. You got to get your defense right in this as well. So I think those are just a few of the players. If you want to, I think you have to get a little funky. You don't have to get crazy, but I think you got to get a little funky with some of those teams. And I think those are some of the pivots you can do.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some game theory and some of the rules here. But Mike, the reason that I invited you on the show, I know you do a lot of high stakes stuff, and this is just such a fun and unique challenge here. For anybody who hasn't looked up the rules already, what you have to do is you have to draft 12 players. You're only allowed 1 player per team. So things do get interesting. You can't just load up and say, hey, well, I think that the Bills and Eagles are going to be in the Super Bowl, so I'm going to draft 6 players on the Bills and 6 players on the Eagles. It doesn't work like that. You have to spread yourself thinly. So, Mike, who are some of the players that you're looking at here that might be a little bit not so chalky?
I love this tournament. I probably should say first that I've never had much success in it. Last year,
And that's why you like it, because it keeps you coming back.
I guess. The Draft Sharks guys and I had teamed up. We plan to do that again on a few entries. I feel like and I would appreciate being corrected on this because I have less experience, I'm sure, than Eric and maybe yourself too, Dave. But I feel like the most important thing, or the first thing you got to do, is pick the games. Like, who's going to win? Who will be in the Super Bowl? You're playing against, as Eric said, so many competitors that you just kind of have to plant your flag like you're in a big March Madness contest or something like that. Who's going to win? And then play it backwards. If you did that last year, you probably won money. Like, maybe you didn't have exactly the right Bengal or exactly the right Ram. But if you took the 4 seeds to go to the Super Bowl last year and faded Allen, who only played 2 games, or Mahomes, who played, 2 games, right? Or 3, whatever it was, that you would have been successful. Aaron Rodgers last year. So do that. And I would also say, don't be too edgy or too, crazy with the teams. I mean, last year at 4s in the Super Bowl is even sort of rare. There's a lot left to figure out, especially in the AFC. I live in Western New York. We got amazingly good news today on Damar Hamlin. We don't know if the Bills-Bengals game is going to be resumed, what they're going to do with home field. Did you hear that Adam Schefter relayed today that the league is talking about giving the 1 seed in the AFC the choice of a bye week or home field, and leaving the other to the 2nd seed, trying to make it fair for Buffalo if Kansas City closes that down. Whatever happens, I'm not expecting the Bills-Bengals game to be resumed, but I suppose it could happen somehow. I don't think so, though. Who the 1 seed is there, that's a big deal. That's 1 fewer game, and then you play all the matchups. Does Miami get in if the Bills beat New England this week? And what could that mean? The Tennessee-Jacksonville game. In terms of a team, Eric mentioned a couple of their guys. I think Dallas is interesting because for me, they're the right kind of balance of a very good team with Super Bowl aspirations and a real chance. And they're not a top seed, probably. That's not official yet. And they have great fantasy options. So they could end up being the 5 seed, but they might be a team I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so many different discussions we could have here, and we'll get into that. But I mean, this is such an interesting. I feel like everything you said, Mike, made me want to ask another question about how do we dive deeper into this. Before we dive too deep into this contest, though, let me hit some quick introductions here. Top right of my screen, I'm joined with Mike Schopp. Mike, you mentioned it. You are in Western New York. Obviously, just a terrible incident that happened this weekend. Don't want to spend too much time talking on that, but like you said, we did get some new good news this morning on Damar Hamlin. So thoughts and prayers are with everybody in Bills Mafia. But real quickly, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and all of those fun things.
Thank you. At Schopp Talk, SCHOPP, doesn't sound like it looks or look like it sounds. TALK is me on Twitter. I've been the afternoon drive host at WGR Buffalo for more than 20 years, and have done Bills postgame for more than that. So I'm involved in their network. And in terms of fantasy, I got a lucky hookup like 3 years ago with the guys at Draft Sharks, and I've been privileged to do a lot of work with them. Adam Krautwurst and I have hosted a podcast called The Deep End that's been through Draft Sharks. And I'll be on again with Draft Sharks, I think, on Tuesday to talk about this very tournament with Jared Smola and Matt Schauf and Adam. So, yeah, you can find me that way, those ways.
Yeah. Everybody at Draft Sharks over there, Matt, Adam, all Jared, all former guests of this show, the Launchpad. So at Footballguys, we love the guys over at Draft Sharks. And so you just recently brought Herms on, another very good friend of Footballguys. So congratulations on that acquisition. Down to the bottom of my screen, we've got Eric Balkman over at FFPC. And Eric, I want you to introduce yourself, but also why don't you tell us a little bit about this playoff challenge that we're going to be talking about today and how people can sign up for that?
Yeah, sure. I host the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the FFPC YouTube channel every Friday night at 10/9 Central. I've been doing that show now. I think we're in year 12 or coming up on year 12 or year 13. But bring on a different high stakes player every single week to kind of pick their brain, whether it's dynasty in the off season or whether it's lineup submission during the season or, roster construction with drafting during drafting season. Always love doing that show. I host at 10/9 Central again on the FFPC YouTube channel, youtube.com/FFPC Fantasy. I also host the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. That's also on the FFPC YouTube channel, but you can always check it out, rotoviz.com/podcast. That is a Tuesday night program that airs weekly during the season. again with another FFPC high stakes player. And then when we go to the off season, it comes out on the first Tuesday of every month for the Road of his High Stakes Down. I also host the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, which you can check out on the Better Sports Network app. It's also on Better Sports, betternetwork.com. Where I bring on, somebody within the industry. Mike was just a guest on there a couple of weeks ago. And then Dave, I know we talked about it. We're going to get you on at some point when you're not working as hard as you are and have been for seemingly, forever with Football Guys and doing everything that you're doing. We'll get you on as well. That aired that we actually just switched that. It is now airing starting this year at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday nights. So that is what we're going to be doing with that show going forward. Now, as far as the Football Guys Playoff Challenge, just to give you a little bit of background on this, our co-founder at the FFPC, Alex Kaganowski, had this playoff challenge that he would host even prior to the FFPC. And once we launched the FFPC in 2008, we kind of carried it over to that where we opened it up to everybody playing in the FFPC. And that was a $200 entry, a $500,000 grand prize. That's what it's at right now. That's not what it started at, but that's what it's at right now. And then a few years back with our good buddies over at Football Guys, Joe Bryant, David Dodds, what have you, we launched the Football Guys Playoff Challenge, which is an exact carbon copy of the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge, but it's only $35 to get in, and you can still win a six-figure grand prize on that. So that's sort of how this developed. It's been a lot of fun. We get a ton of people playing it every year. And I always say it's kind of like, it's a little like poker, right? Where it takes 2 minutes to understand how to play. But I don't think anybody's ever mastered and cracked the formula of it. And that's what makes it so maddening and so fun.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I was poking around yesterday on the website over at FFPC and just kind of getting an understanding for this tournament. And the more I read, the more intrigued I got. Like I said, the rules are simple. You figure it out really quickly, but there are a million different ways you can go. And let's keep discussing this a little bit. Mike, I'll throw it back to you because, you talked about it a little bit earlier that, there are 14 teams making the playoffs and you're allowed to build 12 on your roster. So the first thing that kind of jumped out to me is you're essentially fading two teams. When you're building your roster, you don't want to draft anybody that's going to be on these one and done teams. So it could be a team that's playing in the first round that you expect to get eliminated. It could be a team that you project to have a first round pick that's going to, or the number one seed that gets eliminated in round two. So Mike, who are the two teams that you're kind of fading as we look at the playoff picture right now?
Yeah, we'll see based on the matchups. Green Bay at best will be the 7 in the NFC, and they might, and maybe it's San Francisco, right? Most likely. And they might be a little buzzy because it's Rodgers, because it's the Packers, and they're on a winning streak if they win Sunday night. And so I think it probably wouldn't be called contrarian to not pick the 7 seed, but maybe a little bit more so than usual if it's the Packers. I think New England, if they're the 7 in the AFC, nobody's going to want to touch them. I mean, there's been a team, the Bears 2 years ago, and they're teams that just nobody wants to touch. You're almost fading 4 if you think about the kicker and the defense too. Like, I don't want to spend too much time strategizing over those positions. I want guys, I want those to be on teams that are probably going to lose in the first round. So then, there'll be, then you got to just sort of try to, as you go along, find 2 or 3 players, if that's the number, that you think will make you different. I think the guy, Dave, over your right shoulder is an interesting idea for that. Because Lamar Jackson has not played in forever, and they're going to the playoffs. They might get the Tennessee-Jacksonville winner in the first round, or even Cincinnati, and he might just reappear, and nobody's optimistic for them, like with how weak they are at receiver and how much they've struggled. So, I mean, you're omitting necessarily many great quarterback options in fantasy if you go that route, but I'll probably have at least one team with him on it.
Yeah, I think Lamar Jackson was one of the first people that jumped out to me. Obviously, I am a fan, as you can see behind me, but also just recency bias. He had a couple cold games and then hasn't played in a few weeks, and suddenly everybody just forgets that Lamar Jackson exists and is one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the league. So love that call out there. Eric, kind of same question to you, though. Are you looking to fade any two teams specifically? And I think it's a really interesting discussion to have. Like I said, even the 1 seed, if you think that the 1 seed isn't going to make it that far, obviously they're going to be the best team, but they're missing 1 game right off the jump. So you might kind of want to fade the Chiefs or Eagles if they land that 1 seed a little bit. Who are the teams that you're not that interested in getting players off of?
Yeah, I think Mike's right. I think obviously, you know, by definition, you have to fade two teams, but I think that essentially everybody who's entering this is sort of fading four teams, except, and I'll bring this up, 9 years ago in 2014, the Broncos and the Seahawks played in the Super Bowl. And if you remember that was the undoing of Peyton Manning, just absolutely got blown up by that Seahawks defense. And the gentleman who won, it was back then, it was a $200,000 grand prize. He won $200,000 because he had the Seattle defense that carried him through the playoffs. And then he ended up beating the guy who had, I think, like Marshawn Lynch or something like that in the Super Bowl. So
Eric,
while
two touchdowns, right, and maybe a safety in that game.
Yeah, something like that.
Percy
I know.
Harvin, and then
Malcolm Smith wasn't
Malcolm.
he the Super Bowl MVP?
Yes.
Like it was insane, like to see that happen. And I got a chance to talk to the guy who won, and I mean, 48 hours later, his heart was still racing. He couldn't believe it happened, and it happened. So something to keep in mind too, like when you talk about the one seeds. I think last year, as we looked at the one seed, I think a lot of people thought that Green Bay and Tennessee were a little fraudulent, especially Tennessee. And both of those teams combined to score 26 points in their only game of the playoffs. Green Bay put up 10 at home against San Francisco. Cincinnati put up 16 when they hosted or Tennessee when they hosted Cincinnati. They only put up 16. And then you had 2 4 seeds meeting in the Super Bowl. And if it wasn't for a dropped interception, you would have had a 6 seed from the NFC and a 4 seed from the AFC, which is crazy town banana pants, right? That just never happens. So as far as teams this year, I think you got to look at number one, who's hot, right? Because Green Bay and Tennessee weren't all that hot coming into the postseason last year, and they ended up dropping out. The Rams they came on, they made all the plays. They got to the Super Bowl. So I think that the teams that are playing well right now can carry this momentum over. I also think that you have to look at teams. Mike was great when he brought up the Bears too. Like nobody wanted any part of the Bears. Patriots for years too is a team that, you know, you don't know what to do with. And usually the teams that you don't know what to do with, that's the team you pick the kicker from. That's the team you pick the defense from, because those are the sort of like playable fades in this contest, because you got to play somebody there. And it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes, you know, you want to have the kicker, have the defense from those teams, although it is rare. So I think if a team is cold, regardless of you know, how high of a seed that they're going to be, how many home games they're projected to play, I think you have to, you know, walk a little bit lightly with those squads, and maybe those are the pivots, and then maybe you go with somebody that, you know, nobody is going to have off that squad. So I think that's interesting. I know Mike brought up Dallas. I think that the formula for fading Dallas is there. And you think about how close that they have come over the years to actually doing something in the playoffs. It's been rare. I mean, they've faded down the stretch several times. And I know Mike McCarthy, and there's a narrative out there that the Cowboys will get in, but then they'll, you know, fold up shop once they get in. I think that there's something to be concerned with there if you're playing any Cowboys. So I think anybody with Dallas, I know you can make the case that they could be great. You know, I was just talking about Elliott. I think Dalton Schultz is going to be heavily owned in this contest as well. But I also could see them going out in the first round.
So they go to, if you don't mind, Dave, like they go to Tampa, and you got to make sure you correlate, right? So if I want to go on Dallas, I think Suckup's going to be my kicker on most of my teams, because there's a chance there with Tampa Bay. They'll be an underdog at home though. And this year, I don't see myself fading the ones this year. I feel like the point about last year's teams is excellent. And this year, it's Mahomes, it's Buffalo,
totally
it's
different.
Philadelphia. It's totally different. It's gonna be tougher. Yeah.
And I agree. And I think that the one seeds this year, and again, we don't know who the one seeds are. Like you said, it could be Kansas City, Buffalo, could be Philadelphia. And like we talked about, Dallas is still in the running at all. So obviously, if you draft a quarterback off that team, you're taking a 0 in round 1. So Eric, you could start us off here, but are you kind of penalizing the quarterbacks to get that 1 seed? Like as much as, you know, Hurts and Patrick Mahomes have been godsends in fantasy this year, if they have the 1 seed with quarterbacks scoring more than any other position, typically, are you kind of fading the 1 seed quarterbacks in this contest?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have done that over the years to some success. Although I will say, I looked up our 2 champions last year, the $500,000 winner and the $100,000 winner. And of course, both of them had Josh Allen at quarterback. So go figure, right, on that. But I think that, you know, everybody I've talked to who's played in this contest echoed what Mike said originally. Map out your playoff bracket first, And then once you have that, then you'll kind of know. Now, there's some people that will run algorithms and simulate games and then just simply add up the points of what they project each player to be at. And you'll know, okay, well, is it more valuable to have Travis Kelce or is it more valuable to have Patrick Mahomes? Is it better to have Patrick Mahomes on your team rather than Josh Allen and go with Stephon Diggs? I mean, these are all things that you have to weigh. So I think fading the 1 seed quarterbacks is certainly viable. And it has worked out in years past. It didn't necessarily, work out every time. But I think that there is a method to the madness there of doing that, being different, increasing your variance, and having a tight end or having a stud receiver or a stud running back instead of those, because they'll still put up points in the Super Bowl. And you can only have one quarterback going at a max in the Super Bowl. So you still got to get the other conference, right as far as what position you're going to go with there. But to your point, fading the 1 seed quarterbacks, I think can work out and be very profitable.
Yeah, and you're also getting double points in the Super Bowl, like you mentioned. So even if you're taking that 0 in round 1, you're hopefully making up for it twofold in the Super Bowl. The last thing I'm going to talk about on this show today is I do want to kind of do a rundown of the Week 18 matchups and what to expect a little bit. Before we switch gears, though, do either of you have anything that you wanted to add about this playoff challenge?
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think Travis Kelce is an interesting variable in what happens with Mahomes if they get the 1, because you don't want to take that 0, but Kelce is so dominant at tight end, and you can find up to 8 or 9 quarterbacks that you can make a case for, right down to Trevor Lawrence. I mean, you can find guys, Justin Herbert, that you can ride with. They'll all be playing in week 1. And if you go to Kelce, that seems kind of safe. If Mahomes is going to succeed, Kelce is probably going to succeed. So I think you can look at it that way in terms of quarterbacks.
Yeah, and if you do make it, if the Chiefs make it to the Super Bowl, if you're in a tight end premium league getting double points with Travis Kelce, that's definitely the way to go if you're projecting them to get there. Eric, what was it that you had to say?
Well, I think just, what have we heard all season? Tight end's a dumpster fire. It's outside of Kelce, right? I think Mark Andrews is in that conversation until he started fading. And now you have a situation where, the Ravens are going to be in. What do you do with Mark Andrews? Do you want to take the points and maybe they only play 1 game, but maybe he doesn't even put up double-digit points that game? I mean, we know he can, but the question is, will he? And then you look at some of these other tight ends that are probably going to be available in this game. I think in this playoff challenge, I think TJ Hawkinson is going to be an interesting one for the Vikings. George Kittle is going to be. I mean, I think about the Niners too. Brock Purdy has shown that he is more than capable of leading this offense, right? And we saw Deebo Samuel practice in full on Wednesday. You had George Kittle, who's been a beast at tight end, and then obviously Christian McCaffrey, who a lot of people picked with their first overall pick this past year when he was still with the Carolina Panthers. So I think that and Dallas Goedert's back, So I think that getting the tight end right and knowing that you can flex out multiple tight ends it's crucial every single year. I think it's really crucial this year.
Yeah, and that makes a great point. I mean, pretty much every top-scoring tight end is in this playoff championship. There isn't. I mean, it looks like Evan Ingram's going to make it in there as well. So, I mean, you got a lot of different options that you can go for tight end here. Hopefully, we gave some good information here to the listeners. If you're looking to sign up for this, just check in the description below. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast, we've got a link in the description where you can sign up for this yourself. We got 2 options. The one sponsored by Footballguys, the FFPC Footballguys Playoff Challenge, is just $35 to join. So I've got a few entries in there. And then you got the Big Boy Championship if you want to do that one for a $200 entry with $500,000 going to the winner. So check out the link in the description below so you could play against me, Eric, and Mike in this playoff tournament.
I actually will not be it, just as an employee of the FFPC, since we operate it. Of course not. I will not be in it. Just so everybody's understanding that.
I will damn well be there.
What was that?
Mike will definitely.
I will damn well be there. Yeah, yes, I'm already in there a few times.
Play against Mike and I while Eric watches us from the outside and cheers us all on. But what I want to wrap this show up with is just a quick rundown of these Week 18 matchups. Normally on the Launchpad, what we do are deep dives, talking about quarterback and wide receiver matchups and doing all this. But the fantasy season's over at this point. But some people are still out there playing DFS. So I just want to do a quick rundown, division by division, talk about every single game here and some things that we might not be thinking about. Who's motivated to start their players, who's motivated to rest their players, talk about some playoff seeding and some draft pick implication. Let's start off with your team, Mike. We probably aren't going to talk about this one too much. The Pats are playing to get into the playoffs, and the Bills are probably playing for the 1 speed. for the 1 seed. So we expect everybody in this Patriots-Bills game to be playing in full. This is basically a pseudo playoff game, right, Mike?
Doesn't have to be if Kansas City wins and the Bills know by Sunday, assuming they're playing this game Sunday, which I think probably that they can't get the 1. They'll be playing for 2 versus 3 unless there is, like we mentioned earlier, some arrangement where there is a stake. What their stake is not clear yet. So, there's a chance to knock out the Patriots 2 versus 3. Last year they were the 3. They went on the road in the second round and they lost a famous game. I think probably most of their guys play, but the thing we've been talking about here all week is their emotional state, like whether the guys can focus and compete. And, they didn't talk yesterday. I don't know what they'll say today, but, they're in terms of betting, they're dicey for this week. New England, though, like it's win or you're out. So you're going to get their best, probably.
Yeah. New England's got a lot to play for. The other game in this division is kind of a weird one as well because the Jets are eliminated. Miami is still playing to get in. Now, Mike, I'll just throw this one to you again. There's some bad blood between the Jets and the Dolphins. Do you think the Jets are going out saying, hey, we want to spoil the Dolphins' chances at winning the division, or are they just phoning this weekend?
No, I bet they're competitive. They beat the Dolphins pretty easily the first time. Maybe Mike Glennon starts in this game. So I think all bets are off when it comes to Miami, and they'll need help to make it. They're on a 5-game losing streak. Miami offers fun DFS lucrative options, and Hill and Waddle, and even the running backs, but really tough to handicap that game, I would think, with Glennon kind of making like Mayfield or Dobbs, or they just joined the team like yesterday or the other day, and now they may end up starting. You don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, especially with the Mayfield and Dobbs that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. Let's hope we don't see that type of game coming from Mike Glennon. When's the last time Mike Glennon's even started a game? I was kind of shocked to see that he was still in the league, let alone starting in a game with playoff implications.
I don't know that he was in the league. He might have been on the practice squad somewhere. He's been lots of places. Maybe 2 years ago is the most recent. Maybe last year. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, he actually started. Believe it or not, he started 4 games for the Giants last year.
Okay.
A lot of those out of my memory. Maybe we all did.
Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about those. Now, we want to look at the Cleveland-Pittsburgh game as well. The Steelers are playing for that 7 seed in the AFC, so they are obviously motivated to play everybody they can. Cleveland is kind of weird, though, because they don't have a first-round pick here, so they might look to rest players. Again, what we're doing is trying to get an edge in betting or DFS here. So, Eric, do you have any sort of insight here on what Cleveland might be doing? I mean, Watson hasn't looked like himself. These in-game reps are extremely important for him being in a new offense. Do you think that they still go out pedal to the metal playing like this is still an important game for Cleveland?
Well, I mean, offensively, I think it'd be silly not to. You want to get these guys out there as much as possible with Deshaun Watson, whether that's, Chubb and Njoku, Cooper, everybody, Peoples-Jones. I think that this is, again, a super valuable tool for the Browns to get set for next year to get these guys out there. Now, defensively speaking, I think you can make a case that, maybe Myles Garrett plays less snaps than he normally would, and I think maybe they let off the gas a little bit there. But I think as far as fantasy or DFS goes in week 18, I haven't read or heard anything that would make me think that the Browns are not going to be playing the full complement of snaps for their offensive players. It's good practice. It's not like Stefanski's trying to save his job. I mean, he's looking forward to next year as well. And to get that team going on track, at least offensively speaking, which hasn't happened with Watson this year yet. I mean, we've seen flashes, but you want to make sure that you get these guys as cohesive as possible. I know it's the final week, and you're going to have a long off season before you get actual real game action again. But it's too important in my opinion, it's too important to sit those guys in this game with Watson.
Yeah, and I haven't read anything that, says that they might bench him either, but this time of year, it's kind of weird. Coaches keep this close to the chest, and we try to read the tea leaves and speculate as much as we can. And Jeff Bell over at Footballguys just wrote an article about this, which is kind of what inspired this segment of the show today, where he went through every single game, and he even talked about contract incentives that players may be motivated to hit. Went super in depth. So I'll have a link for that in the description as well. Recommend checking that out. Mike, what's up?
That's important. I was waiting to say, like, Chubb is 52 yards away from 1,500, and that's what the media is asking about this week. Is like, do you care about that? And I think so for a serious DFS player, they want to know all those what possible individual incentives. And also if you can add to that, what does the coach's track record say about that? If in the past, what did they do on week 17? Just be careful not to assume the team with a stake is going to win, because every year, there are surprises that final week. Indianapolis, Jacksonville last year. Jacksonville's the worst team in the league. Indianapolis is a win in your in game, and they got smoked.
Yep. And that's a game where had we had this conversation a year ago, we'd have said there's no possible way that they are going to blow this game. And that's exactly what they did. So yeah, any given Sunday, anything could happen. The other game in this division, though,
just real quick. I know we touched on it earlier, but I think like the Jets, they are a perfect example of that. Nothing to play for, but I look at the head coach, right? And I think Robert Saleh, it's just not in his DNA to let his players go out there with anything less than full force, right? And I think they take it. Sigmund Bloom says this all the time. Teams take on the personality of their quarterbacks and their head coach. And Robert Saleh is let's get after it. And we'll talk about this in a second too. Dan Campbell with the Lions. He already said this week, because they'll know if they are playing for anything because the Seattle game will be done at that point. But he said either we get to play for a spot in the playoffs or we get to play spoiler. Either way, we win. This guy just wants to unleash hell at Lambeau Field on Sunday night, regardless of what the Lions are playing for. So I think, like as Mike said, look at the head coach, look at their track record, and I think you can glean a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying about the Jets. I don't talk picks on this show all the time, but I do have Jets money line this week for that exact reason, because Robert Saleh, he just wants to win, and he is not going to let his team get off easy. The other game in this division, though, is Baltimore and Cincinnati, assuming that game plays as scheduled. Both teams are going to be playing in full there. Bengals playing for the 1 seed, Baltimore playing for seeding. So let's talk about the AFC South, because this is where things get a little bit interesting here. Houston against Indiana. Houston is playing for the #1 overall pick, so you'd think that they'd be motivated to rest their players, but the Colts have their first rounder, and they can move up with a loss as well. So I don't really know what to expect here. I feel like this is two bad teams that are just trying to suck more than the other team. Both teams are very motivated to lose. So, Mike, what are we kind of expecting in this matchup?
I mean, no idea. Backup running backs that are minimum cost in DFS.
More Jeff
I don't know. Like, I mean, players don't play to lose. What you get from those coaches is really, I mean, that's a tough call. I do want to, if it's all right, I'm not assuming Baltimore, Cincinnati is, both teams all in. In fact, I'm predicting that it isn't. Right. I think the Bengals are talking about, like, if they don't replay the Buffalo game, they have clinched that division, and they're going to play Baltimore next week, maybe. So both teams could back up there, take their stars out. It was an emotional week, especially for Cincinnati, league-wide, but the Bengals were on that field. So anyway, I would be careful with that game.
That's a good point. Yeah, and there still is a lot of scheduling that we don't really know yet. So hopefully we'll have some better answers as we get closer to kickoff for those games. The other game, though, in the AFC South, we talked about Houston, Indianapolis. That's going to be a messy game. We don't really know what to expect. We know with Tennessee and Jacksonville, both of these teams are playing to get in. Winner of that game gets the division, so we'll skip over that one. Now talking about the Chargers and Broncos. Broncos are already eliminated, but a win for the Chargers could push them up into the 5th seed, which gives them the winner of that Jacksonville Tennessee matchup. I think that's what a lot of teams are hoping for right now in the AFC. But with Hackett getting fired, you got to wonder if the Broncos are even going to try to do much. I mean, they got a new coach heading into this week. So, Eric, read the tea leaves here. What are we expecting in this game? Do we see another Brett Rypien game? Does Russell Wilson come out there? I don't really know what to expect with this one from Denver.
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind, too, is Denver, we don't know what's going to happen with them as far as their coaches go next year. And when you have a new coaching staff coming in, you not only have all these coaches auditioning for maybe the head job or other jobs, but you have players that don't know if they're going to be back next year because of the changeover there. So this is a tough one. I don't necessarily think that Denver rests anybody. But there was something that we saw from Jerry Rosburg, that's his name, right? The interim Broncos coach. And he said, and I'm trying to get the quote here about Albert Okwuegbunam. I haven't seen him much on the field this year, and I'm just curious as to why that was, because he is a good-looking athlete. Dulcich went on injured reserve, so I think that obviously freed up Okwuegbunam to be on the field a little bit more. But this is the kind of stuff that you kind of got to be looking at. With a new head coach, and I know he's only an interim one, but there could be different things that play out that haven't played out the way that we thought during the season. Now, as far as DFS goes, I'm not really that interested, regardless of what Denver's doing in the backfield with any of the running backs there. Not really, too concerned with messing around with this offense in general. This is such a cop-out answer, but Denver's been so bad this year. It doesn't really matter who they're trotting out there. I mean, outside of that game against the Chiefs where they really gave them all they could handle, I haven't really been excited about any Denver Broncos, and whether they rest somebody, whether they don't, to me, it all blends together. Now the Chargers, I think, and you pointed this out, Dave, they have an opportunity to go on the road in the first round, but against a team that is mediocre at best, whether that's Jacksonville or Tennessee, and that might be the best way to get into the divisional playoff if they can score the 5 seed. So yeah, fire away with all your Chargers. Maybe not Gerald Everett, because he is, kind of let fantasy managers down the last couple of weeks. But yeah, man, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, Herbert, fire them up.
Yeah, agree with that. And now, last game in this division, KC in Las Vegas, and this is another really weird one. You assume that the Chiefs want to play for the 1 seed, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen with the NFL scheduling and all of that right now. So I think the main thing that I'm interested in is you got Josh Jacobs, who's a free agent after this year. Josh McDaniels has made it pretty obvious with his actions that he doesn't care about running him into the ground. So it wouldn't shock me if Josh Jacobs comes out and gets 30 touches, but they've also got, $30 million tied into Devontae Adams next year. Mike, what are you thinking with this one? Do you think that we see Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller, everybody come out and play in a lost season? Or is this the time where we go out and we draft Zamir White and Keelan Cole and Foster Moreau on our DFS lineups?
Yeah, I think they'll go all in. It's Kansas City. What happened last week with teams like these, like Denver too? What did they do last week? They played everybody. Like they don't need to rest guys. So yeah, I would think that you get their best game. Kansas City at home playing spoiler, and Kansas City this is a big game for the Chiefs. So I think that the first game of the weekend will look pretty legit.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm expecting as well, just because Josh McDaniels is a hardo and he never wants to let off the gas pedal. So that's kind of what I'm anticipating with this one. NFC East, Dallas and Washington. Dallas still has a chance at the 1 seed, like we talked about. It would take an Eagles loss, so they're going to be playing as hard as they can. Washington, with a loss, can move into the top 10. So I think we heard, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Sam Howell's getting the start this week, right?
Yeah, it was conflicting reports early, right? That first, Howell was going to play, but he wasn't going to start. And now we heard, I think, Pelissero.
Heineke was the one that gave him the vote of confidence, right?
Exactly, yeah. And now apparently it's going to be Howell, which they should be doing. I mean, you took this guy in the draft this past year, see what you got in him with one game, and this is going to kind of muck things up a little bit for Commanders. Now, Dotson has really been coming on. So I think he's an interesting guy, regardless of quarterback. McLaurin, I think for DFS, it's hard for me to get excited for him. But if you are playing Week 18 fantasy championships, okay, I get it. No Antonio Gibson. He was placed on injured reserve, and this should be, a Brian Robinson gain, right? I know they probably want to save him for next year, but to me, to get a young guy some reps with a guy who probably represents your best future at quarterback on the roster right now, I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about the other game in the NFC East, the Giants and the Eagles. Weird enough, this game means more for the Eagles than it does for the Giants. The Giants win or lose, they're locked in at the 6th seed. The Eagles have a chance to clinch the 1 seed with a win, so we might see them motivated to bring Jalen Hurts back if possible. I think the Giants are kind of a weird case, though, where we could see them hit the bench a little bit early. They've said that Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones are in their future plans. I think that Brian Daboll has done more than enough to, show that he's got the chops to be a head coach in the league. So, Mike, is this one of the, kind of off the radar? I haven't seen many people talk about it, but is this one of the matchups where we could see the Giants starters hitting the bench early?
Definitely. Yeah, I expect it. The line is 14. The Dallas line is 7. I think Dallas will take their guys out if Philadelphia gets ahead. They could do that in their game in Washington, because if Philly wins, their game's irrelevant. And I think the betting markets make it look like they're expecting the Giants to sit. The Giants, that's a perfect situation to do that. So I think definitely Hurts is back, and Philly goes after it, and they're hoping to have an easy day. They might get one. But yeah, I wouldn't want to play any Giants this week.
Yeah, don't be fooled by Daniel Jones's week last week. Do not get Daniel Jones anywhere in week 18. Now, the Detroit Green Bay game in the NFC North, we don't need to talk about that at all. That is pretty much a playoff game, Sunday Night Football. If Seattle wins earlier in the day, the Lions have a chance to get in. And like we talked about earlier, even if Seattle loses, or if Seattle wins, it doesn't matter. Dan Campbell wants to go into Green Bay and kick the snot out of the Packers. The other game, though, is Minnesota and Chicago. Chicago should be motivated to lose here. I mean, if they win or if they lose and Houston somehow pulls off the win, all of a sudden the Bears are the #1 overall pick. They can fall as low as 5th overall with a win, though. We already got the word that Justin Fields, I was hoping that they were going to send him out there just so he can hit that all-time rushing record, but we got the word that Nathan Peterman is starting now. So I think this is one where you can expect to see Minnesota playing their guys in full, and Chicago is phoning it in at the end of the season. 2 more divisions I want to cover.
I think Minnesota could rest too. Like they're probably the 3. And is that game early?
Yes,
it is an early game. Yeah.
Okay. San Francisco's later, so they won't know San Francisco's result, but I don't see it being a huge game for Minnesota. And if they have it easy, I would think that they're a candidate to rest their stars too.
Yeah, because if they get the win and the 49ers lose, they could technically move up to the 2 seed, but I don't know if that's all that important for them. It doesn't really make a huge difference being the 2-3 or the 2 seed or the 3 seed. So you make a good point there, Mike.
It's just possible, right? It's just possible.
Like, right.
They have there is a stake. So that's important to point out. There is a stake with Minnesota. It's just, if it's kind of a easy, fast, low-scoring game, I don't know. Like, I could just see it. I wouldn't assume that they wouldn't rest Cousins or Jefferson or whoever. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with that, but I also could easily see the Vikings, getting up by 20 points early in the third quarter, and then you're only getting a half game of work from some of those guys. Because Nathan, who's Nathan Peterman, right? Is starting for the Bears. Like, he's not leading any Kirk Cousins 33-point comebacks. Like, once this game's in the bag, I really don't see the Bears coming back. And at that point, then you run the risk of if you're playing Jefferson or Cook or Hawkinson or Cousins or any of these guys, you run the risk of only getting like 2.5 quarters out of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And so yeah, I think this is one of those games that you just want to avoid altogether. Like you said, it could be a very quick, low-scoring game. That's kind of what I'm expecting. For the NFC South, we got Carolina and New Orleans, who are both eliminated. Carolina is going to land somewhere between 6 and 9 in the draft. Saints don't have a first-rounder. So this is a game where I could easily see Carolina. I mean, not that they have to do much to phone it in. They could put out their first string and still phone in a matchup. But this is a game where I expect to see Carolina not putting their best foot forward, as they are hoping for that top 6 pick, most likely. Atlanta and Tampa Bay, the Bucs locked up the 4th seed. They have no chance of moving up or down. They are locked in there. They're probably going to be resting their starters. The Falcons are probably looking to lose here. So, Mike, do you have any insight on this one? I mean, I think Tampa Bay is probably going to rest their guys, right?
Well, Todd Bowles said they're not. That was early in the week. He said that we have work to do to get in form for the playoffs. So I don't know. That's what I heard early in the week, that the Tampa guys go here could be temporary, like we were just talking about. I think, I don't think teams, if you're trying to predict, are they going to, give 100%? These teams that are eliminated in terms of the draft, that'll either not happen or you'll see it in who plays. Like if it comes from management that we need to lose this game, we'll never hear them say it, but you'll notice it maybe in who sits. If guys are going to play, they're going to play hard. I mean, Carolina, New Orleans, I'm thinking, is probably a game where both teams just play like they usually do. So that's
and Steve Wilkes is trying to get that full-time gig in Carolina too. So he wants to have a good showing there. Regarding the Buccaneers, Bowles did say that the starters are going to play, but he also said that Kyle Trask would have a good chance of actually suiting up for this game as well, which to me suggests starters are going to play, but maybe not all 4 quarters too.
Right.
And like we talked about earlier, one of the things you want to do is look back at previous coaching tendencies. Well, this is Todd Bowles' first year as a head coach, so it's really tough. This is going to help us for future games. Last 2 I want to talk about, Arizona and San Francisco. 49ers are running for the 1 seed. Cardinals have lost 6 straight. They can move up as high as 2 if they lose this game. So, most of their starters are on injured reserve at this point, but I would expect the 49ers to try to win, and Cardinals are just trotting out whatever they still have standing. And then the last matchup, Los Angeles Rams at Seattle Seahawks. Seattle needs to win and a Packers loss to get into the playoffs. And the Rams, since they don't have a first-round pick, they are probably motivated to win this game as well and see what they've got in Baker Mayfield. So I expect that game to be, played as tough as possible by both teams and coaches. Took a little bit longer than I thought to run through all those games, but we hit every single Week 18 matchup there. So hopefully that'll help you prep for Week 18 DFS. But most importantly, be sure to check out the FFPC Football Guys Playoff Challenge. You can find the link in the description below to sign up for that. And before we sign off here, one more time, Mike, let everyone know where they can find you on social media, where they can find you on the radio, and all of that fun stuff.
At Schopp Talk, SCHOPPTALK. WGR Sports Radio 550 in Buffalo. It's an Odyssey station, so it's a big company with stations all over the country. You might have the Odyssey app to listen on. You can do that. I'll be on this afternoon. And don't follow me on Facebook. I don't go there.
Yeah, I don't think many people are using Facebook nowadays. But Eric, if you got a Facebook that you'd like to plug or anything else, now is your chance.
Yeah, at Eric Balkman on Twitter. You can follow me on Facebook. I think I'm the Eric Balkman on Facebook. I should, give you an idea. I don't even remember what it is, but YouTube.com/FFPC Fantasy. I host both the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown and the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. They're weekly during the season. And then the HSFF Hour is still weekly throughout, all 12 months. And then the Lowdown will be monthly on their first Tuesday of every month going forward. And of course, the Better Sports Network, the Better Sports Network app, which is free in the Google Play Store and the App Store. And you can always check it out, Better Sports and BetterNetwork.com. That is Thursday nights from 7 to 9.
Yeah, I've been a couple on those Better Sports Network shows, and they are a ton of fun. So be sure to check that out. And of course, I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. But most importantly, sign up and subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys to check out all of the video content that we offer here at Football Guys. In addition to my show, we've also got the Audible. We've got our shorts. We're going to be doing mock drafts as we head into rookie season and so much more. youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much for checking this out. I'm going to be off for the next couple of weeks, but we will see you again right before the NFL draft. Thank you for tuning in. As always, be sure to subscribe, youtube.com/footballguys, where you can find all of our video content. If you have not already, give us a thumbs up. That's going to help some other people find this video. And if you have anything to add, leave it down low in the replies, and I will be sure to get back to you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in just a couple weeks.